Welcome to the Back Porch, everybody. You're listening to the Signpost Inn podcast. My name is Brandon Booth, and I have with me today one of my regular co-hosts, Matt Boland. Good to see you, Matt.
Good to see you too, Brandon.
For the regular listeners, Peter couldn't join us today. He's actually being really sweet and taking care of his baby while his wife takes the morning and has a day off from being a mom, which he told me that yesterday. I was like, hey, we're going to podcast. And he's like, well, I said this thing. And I was like, oh, right, fine, go do the good thing for your family. So, Peter, we miss you, but we're glad you're doing something good. It's just me and Matt today, which kind of old school. I remember the days when it was just you and me, Matt. We were the duo for a while.
It's very familiar territory.
I'm excited about today's episode. We're doing things a little bit, I suppose, backwards. I know we've sort of said this in the previous couple episodes. We tackled the spiritual practice or the spiritual discipline of reading scripture in January. Actually, the first of those episodes came out the last Friday of December. So I don't know exactly when this show will show up on the cycle, probably late January, early February. However, what this episode is really about kind of introducing what the theme for our year is going to be. The content theme for a lot of what Signpost Inn is going to do this year. We've landed on this phrase, spirituality as our longing for more. And leaving it at that because that's pretty pregnant. That means a lot of different things. That we have this longing for more, first of all. But then, of course, the next question is, more what? So there's a lot to talk about in this. And listeners, to be honest, this is not a theme that's new. This is, in a lot of ways, the theme of our ministry. And today we're going to tackle just what does it even mean to have what is spirituality? What does that word really even mean in today's world? And maybe what are some ways we can start to address the question that it's naming? I know that probably sounds very esoteric right now. I promise it won't be, but going to be an interesting ride today, interesting conversation on the back porch. Matt, I'm glad that you're along with me. He helped me pull these things out of the air.
Conversations are the best thing about the back porch, Brandon.
Pull this stuff out of the air and bring it back down to earth, I hope. I apologize for my voice. I have got the sick and I feel fine. It's got this weird thing going on in my voice. But anyway, that's where we're headed today. Before we jump into the topic, Matt, give us some updates. What's going on in your life?
Thankfully, very little right now. 2024, especially the later half it's all been very busy. And we know that we're entering into a busy season here in 2025 pretty early on. So over the past week, we've been working actually hard to say no to things and do little, just recuperate, refresh, recharge. We got to go out and have dinner with another couple friend that we have from church and just had fun, enjoyed each other's company. And that was just so good. And, great friends. It's funny how there are some friends where you just know, like, okay, this will be fun, but it's going to be tiring. But then there's those other friends that spending time with them is recharging, and that was last night. So we're out to dinner, we're just having fun and we're enjoying each other. And it was so great. And so we're enjoying a little bit of downtime before we jump back into a very busy it's a very busy 6 months coming up.
New Year always feels that way,
right?
It's like the first day of the semester and you get the syllabus and you look at everything on the syllabus and you're like, how am I going to do all of this? And I just remember my mother always telling me, you don't have to do it all today.
You're triggering me right now. I'm going to stop it.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Well, thank you. I'll be praying for your next 6 months.
Thanks.
We are, I think, in a very similar boat. Like, things are quiet during this change of year time, but I can see in the next few days things pick up again, right? The schedule starts again and I'm excited about it. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that is really positive in the future for us. And there's things I'd love to talk about here on the show about things in the future of Signpost Inn, but it's like I can't Sorry, I can't talk about it just yet. I'm like 2 weeks away from knowing a little bit more, maybe. I don't know. So there's some exciting things on the horizon, I hope. Hopefully, next episode won't be like, so we're never going to talk about that stuff, but I'm excited about it. So there's some real cool things coming up that I want to do. Actually, I will say this much, though. The exploration of the topic of spirituality has been something that I've been working on for a long time. And I'm really kind of excited about focusing the content of this year around this idea because it feels like it's going to clarify a lot of things. This particular episode for me is is sort of selfish. I've been researching this for a long time in preparation for a couple different things that I can't always talk about, but I want to try to put things into words that make sense rather than just have it all on random sticky notes and strings and pens on a board, which is how my mind feels half the time. Listeners, before we do that, really quickly, last thing I want to tell you, I'm giving you a desperate plea for reviews. Please, please, please. Our last review on iTunes, which is where it matters, not iTunes. It's not that anymore. What's it called? Apple Podcasts. Was it from 2023? The last time we got reviewed was in 2023, and it's breaking my heart. So this is one of the key ways that people find us. This is one of the key ways that podcasts get ranked. Go give us a review, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
I'd be very curious how many of our listeners, like what platform they use. So send us an email, listeners. Tell us what platforms you're on, because there's a plethora of podcast platforms that you can consume it. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a review anywhere would be great, but Apple Podcasts is the one that apparently is still the most widely used, and therefore
really
everybody, if you get reviews on Apple Podcasts, that's where that gets all over the internet. So listeners, I'm begging you, this is not like please, if you've listened to the show more than once, just at all, like for any reason at all, listen to it twice, please go give us a review, click 5 stars, say something about what you appreciate. We really need those. So I'm begging you to go do that. All right, that's done. I'm not going to beg anymore until the end of the show when I beg again. All right. Spirituality as our longing for more. Here's the big question, I think, to start with. What is spirituality? What does that word even mean? It's a very popular word in our modern parlance. Today's people talk about spirituality all the time. It's everywhere. What do we mean by that word? And I don't know, Matt, let me throw it at you before I dive into all of research I've done. When I say the word spirituality, what comes to mind?
First thing that comes to mind is when spirituality started becoming cool in the late 90s, when Madonna came out and said on some interview, spirituality and religion were basically synonymous. And people kind of took for granted, like, well, if you're religious, you have a spiritual aspect of of your life. But if you're not religious, you're atheistic, you're spiritual. You don't do anything spiritual. You're just secular or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a turning point, I think, is whenever culture makers and people who are in the cultural spotlight started saying, oh, well, I believe in things. I don't do it in the traditional way. I do it my own way. And that has slowly been evolving since then, I think. Nowadays, you look at spirituality and it's everywhere, right? And I mean, this is kind of my wheelhouse. I love apologetics and I love engaging with people about spiritual things and about Christianity. And it's everywhere. You don't have to convince somebody that there's more out there. There's more to this universe than the physical world. Because most people, I think, take it for granted. I think most people, like if you took a poll, they would generally say, oh yeah, there's some higher thing out there.
Mm-hmm.
But most people are not willing to put their chips down on a specific thing and say, this is what it is. And so whenever you say the word spirituality, that concept is what jumps to my mind is there's more than just the physical life and our day-to-day events. There's something more, and I'm willing to talk about those things, but I'm not narrowing it down to a specific thing. I'm open. And I
Yep.
think that's generally where our culture is right now,
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the openness unless we define it strictly as open to something beyond the merely physical and merely scientific. More on that, I suppose, as we go. But I didn't know that Madonna was the one that started.
In my mind, that's where I went.
Well, no, that's amazing. Like I'm definitely gonna have to track that down if that's like if she's the genesis of that phrase becoming popular, which would stand to reason, especially in the 90s. Because little history on the term, the word spirituality is a 20th century word. It's not really a word that was used in any sense of the way that we use it now until the latter half of the 20th century. And this is there's a guy named Philip Sheldrake wrote a book titled Spirituality, and a lot of this historical stuff comes from his research. But it's exactly what you're saying. Like the word comes around as, especially in the West, especially in America, society and culture begin to react against the culmination of Enlightenment materialism. And so I have that famous quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, who's a German philosopher who wrote 1882. He wrote in a book one of the most famous philosophical phrases ever, which is God is dead. But here's the whole quote, right? God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. Now, I'm going to read the rest of the quote in a second. He doesn't actually believe there is a God. He's an atheist. So he's not saying that we actually killed God. He's saying the idea of God is dead. The ability to believe in a God is now dead. Now, he's writing this in 1882. We've killed the idea of God. It's no longer possible to believe in a divine rationally or sophisticatedly or even really. Nobody really can believe in it because we've proven that that doesn't exist, is what he's saying. Now he goes on. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers, what was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And here's what he's getting at. Nobody can really believe in God anymore because modern science has proven that there's nothing beyond the material world. And so there really is no spiritual, non-physical world. There is no God. There is no divine. That's really bad news in one sense, because that's what we've been using as a crutch. I'm speaking as Nietzsche. That's what we've been using as a crutch for our morality, for our sense of purpose, for our sense of meaning. And now we know it doesn't exist. It's like Santa Claus doesn't exist. And now you found that out. Well, now what do? That's a tragedy in a way. His answer is, well, we have to become our own makers of meaning. We have to be the ones that are like, okay, this is what gives me meaning. That is become God.
Well,
Now,
and so
he wrote that in 1882.
right.
In 1990, 100 years later, give or take, you have the swing back is what you're talking about. What were you going to say?
Well, I
the
was going to
reaction.
say because that writing by Nietzsche is very interesting, and he's not, because if you just read that, it almost sounds penitential. Like he almost is like, oh, he's saying it ironically. And you're right, he doesn't believe in God, and he's almost even still mocking the idea of religion, even in this parable that I completely agree with you. I think people have found that bankrupt, and I think even he couldn't live it out, and
Right.
I think that's one of the things. I think most people recognize that the logical ramifications of a purely naturalistic and materialistic universe ends in meaninglessness. And we all know that we cry for meaning. This is why, over the last couple of years, even Richard Dawkins, who is a famous atheist, is coming out and saying, well, we still need cultural Christianity. we still need the
Mhm.
Christmas carols, and we still need to go, we still need holy days,
Mhm.
and we still need the church to perform weddings and funerals and stuff like that. Because even for him, as a strict materialist and a staunch Darwinian, he is still recognizing, well, we still have to delude ourselves a little bit, because otherwise we recognize this is meaningless.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. His answer is very much the same as Nietzsche's answer, which is we have to have some sort of fiction, some sort of story that's not true, that tells us there's something beyond the mere world that we live in and see. Both Nietzsche and Dawkins fall to the same problem, which is, and this is not an episode about Nietzsche, but they both fall into the same arrogance, which is basically, we need to tell this story to everyone else. We, the smart ones, know that it's not true. But for the sake of society and just mental health, you all need to believe it. So we're going to go ahead and tell everybody that, because you're all idiots. It basically is what they end up doing, both of them, which is really
Well,
insulting.
and I'm blanking on certainty of the name. I think it was was it Michael Roos, scientist and cultural philosopher type person, coined the term the gold or the noble lie or the golden lie, where he's basically saying this idea of, we know that ultimately there's no meaning and no morality, and none of that is true, but we have to lie to ourselves in order to function.
Not,
We
yeah, in order
need the
to,
golden
right,
lie.
right. Which leads us to the next stage, which is World War II happens. And I mean, flying through history here, but you have Nietzsche writing in 18.
Wait. Are you saying ideas have consequences, Brandon? What are you
Yes.
saying right now?
Yes. So you have Nietzsche writing in 1882 that we have just made it impossible to believe in the divine. He thinks that's both kind of tragic, but also a great opportunity. Now we are free from all the old morality. We can make our own, and we can, and we should. That's we have to rise above. There's sort of this age of optimism that happens until the World Wars, and it's mixed. We're flying over a bunch of stuff, but World War II especially happens. Many of the great kind of optimistic philosophical thinkers are suddenly called up short and say, holy crud, here's where that modern death of God, here's where it led. It led to the worst atrocity the world has ever seen. It led to the worst destruction of human life that we've ever noticed, ever, period. And one of the most, I won't say most important, but one of the most significant, I will say, interesting authors out of World War II is a guy named Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He lived through Auschwitz. He was a Jewish psychologist. He survived Auschwitz, survived the worst of human evil. And he writes a book about how did he survive it. The book is called Man's Search for Meaning. The first half of the book is his autobiography of living through Auschwitz. The second half of the book is the beginnings of his own development of a kind of psychotherapy that he called logotherapy, he means like meaning therapy. And basically here's what he says. Here's the gist of it. He says, ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Two things to note about this. Viktor Frankl recognizes, in the face of the worst evil ever, that pretending that there is no meaning is not, or pretending that there is meaning when there is actually no meaning, leads to despair, depression, addiction, anxiety, and violence, aggression. And he named those three. He named anxiety, depression, and violence, aggression, as like the dark triad of the meaning crisis. He says man has to have a meaning in order to survive. You can't live without a meaning. But here's the tricky bit. I don't know if you picked up on it in the quote. He tries to say that we don't make our meaning, that we discover our meaning, that life demands of us that we take responsibility. But hidden in that is the same answer that Nietzsche gives, just with a slight twist. He basically is saying the call of being alive is to live as if there's meaning and find what it is that gives you meaning. And Frankel's very frank, no pun intended, very, very honest. It can be about anything you want it to be. You just have to find what it is that your heart resonates with and then live for that. For him, it was his wife. That's how he survived Auschwitz. He lived for her and for her memory.
And that's very sweet.
It's very sweet.
That's beautiful.
But the question remains, is it truly meaningful? And I think now you fast forward to the 1990s, and what you've got developing in our current context is sort of the end of despair. We've recognized, and then I remember the 1990s being the time when the word postmodern started to be used, and nobody really knew what that word meant. Nobody still knows what that word means.
Still don't know what it means.
It doesn't mean anything in particular. It just means whatever the heck comes after whatever was before it, which we called modern. But it's significant that we really don't know what that word means, because that's where we are. We are at this place where we've recognized that if there is no God, there is no spiritual life, there is nothing beyond this material workaday world, then there is no meaning. We've also realized that the only answer to that, which is courage and honor and live a beautiful life and live a life of responsibility anyway, doesn't actually work.
We got to sidetrack on that a little bit, because currently there are a lot of voices in our culture that are saying that works.
That's true.
There are a lot of so for example, have you heard the term the manosphere?
The what?
The manosphere.
Yes.
It's portraying this idea of there's all these masculine YouTubers and podcasters who are engaging an audience of people of young men who are seeking something to aim at, something to strive for, something to put their strength into.
Yeah,
which is very good. I think in general it's a good thing, but because most of them are not Christian, or I shouldn't say most. There's some big ones that aren't Christian. Okay, go jump in.
No, you're absolutely right. I just think it's significant. Okay, so you're naming a lot of people. Okay, we haven't named anybody, but people like Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke. I don't know many of the names in the manosphere, but I know enough about it to say this. They do represent a new twist on this. They're not giving Nietzsche's or even what I would think is Frankl's answer, because they are, most of them, in some sense, spiritual. This accounts for the fact that in the manosphere that I'm aware of, which is kind of the young men that I work with sometimes, what's not on the rise is Nietzschean, atheistic Ubermensch, rise above the meaninglessness and make meaning for myself. But what is on the rise is Norse paganism.
It's a thing,
because that particular version of spirituality does both of those things. What it does is the religion of paganism, of that kind of paganism, especially appeals to you are still the hero of your own life and you make it of yourself. You do something with yourself. And yet there's also a spiritual realm. There's an eternal meaning to it. Even if it's just the memory and the gods or whatever, you're still appealing to something beyond just this life. There is an eternal realm in which my making myself the hero and the man, quote unquote, has significance.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is we are in a unique time.
It is very unique. And it's interesting that you went that direction, because that wasn't quite what I was thinking about, although I see what you're pointing at for sure. The one where I was going was a moralistic stoicism. And in fact, the number of people of again, YouTubers and TikTokers that are talking about Marcus Aurelius right now is kind of funny when you think about it. You're like,
yeah,
why are people just out of college right now reading Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher, right? And talking about you ought to be good and disciplined just because it's good to do that. And you should stoically endure the chaos of life and be not be moved by it. It may not necessarily take that form, but I think all this is pointing to exactly what you're saying, is there is a realization that what the Enlightenment tried to sell modern people is bankrupt.
Yeah.
It might be a good way of describing the physical sciences in a cold clinical way, but you can't take that out of the laboratory and live on it. It's not manna.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm more familiar with ancient Stoicism than its modern incarnation of Stoicism. But the ancient Stoicists weren't atheists. They just essentially believed that the divine realm didn't care about us. It had nothing really to do with us. But the reason that's important for the conversation I think we're having right now is I don't know about the modern version. My suspicion is that the people who are peddling it are probably quite open to spirituality in this modern sense of something, a realm beyond the mere material, even a part of the human that is beyond the mere material. They may not. I just am wondering if you know about that. Like, do they
Yeah,
probably don't talk about it much, but I'm just saying they're not going to be atheists who are saying there is nothing and therefore this is the way to do it.
obviously this can be nuanced down to the specific person that we're talking about. And even then, you might find that I think what's kind of going on generally is people are just willing to sample and put on their plate a little bit of whatever works for them.
Yeah,
And
that's
that
true.
is,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't know, maybe that's not the right word for it. But I think in general, what spirituality today has become is I
Yes.
adopt what works for me. This works for
Yes.
me
Yes.
right now, and so I'm
Right.
going to pick that up.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That brings us back out of the clouds to the really practical. He wrote this book called Spirituality. Here's how he defines it. He begins by saying that the word spirituality defines our era. That's what we've been talking about. The fascination with spirituality is often contrasted with religion and often contrasted with material. So he says if you use the word spirit, the modern word spirituality, which is a post World War II word, here's what it's come to mean. It's sort of the holistic search for a holistic and fully integrated form of life, a way to approach life that kind of integrates all the different things I have and brings about a kind of health.
Mm-hmm.
Second, it's a quest for what he calls the sacred, which in Christianity is closely related to God, but outside of it, it's sort of the numinous, a kind of experience of the transcendent. And third, it's the quest for meaning, purpose of life, sense of direction, which he points out, and which makes sense is what we've been talking about, that the meaning of the word spirituality in today's context. I'm trying to have a life in which everything is integrated and makes sense, that is a life of thriving and health. I'm trying to have some direct experience of that which is beyond my everyday life, the numinous, the transcendent, the sacred. And I'm trying to experience and have a meaning, purpose for living. All of that points to kind of a breakdown, which is what we've been talking about, of institutional religion and the sense that there was really any unifying purpose, meaning, and purposeful meaning giver in life. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think we live in a very spiritual age. In 2025, we are more spiritual in that sense than we have been in the past 150 years.
Yes. Agreed.
We can
But
name.
there's a but coming.
Go. Just hit me with the but. What is it?
Well, I think the but is that in a sense, it's like we're trying to discover the ancient paths without any guides. It's almost like this ancient wisdom and this civilization that came before us had something and we forgot about it. And we're trying to unearth it like archaeologists, but we don't have any guides. And I think that's
Right.
why you see such a vast array of all types of spiritual. I think this is also a little bit why you see the growth in psychedelics and
Yep.
use of other kinds of
Yep.
harmless drugs being used to expand people's minds. And for those that are listening,
Yep.
I'm using air quotes
quoting.
around that term. It's almost like we still have the bias or the prejudice that says, no, we've rejected those old guides. We're not going to the monasteries and to the monks to really guide us. We're not going to a sage or to an elder because we've already rejected that. Or at least we have a prejudice against it. And instead, it's like we're having to find it ourselves. And that's a hard road. It is hard to rediscover these treasures of the ancient world. I'm sorry, I'm using these metaphorical terms, but doing it without a guide, you know?
Yeah.
It's almost
Yeah.
like I'm gonna walk into the desert of Egypt and I'm gonna
Yeah.
hope to find a treasure. Don't die.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I would even say, as you said that analogy, which is so perfect, right? We're searching for something without knowing even what we're searching for. We know what it would sort of feel like. We know what we would want it to feel like if we found it. It would feel like I have purpose. It would feel like I have a place in the world. It would feel like I have meaning. It would feel like I could understand all the different parts of me as one united whole and could see how it all works together for something. It would mean that I would have a direct line to some kind of certainty and footing in the world, this experience that there is something true and important beyond making money and watching TV. That's what I want it to feel like, but I don't even know where to look. And I find myself not so much in a desert, and this is very much like the early church. I find myself actually on Times Square, surrounded by neon signs offering an answer to all the saying, I have the thing. Here's the thing that will give you that feeling. Here's how you'll feel integrated and purposeful and meaningful. And if you just watch any television or on any of your services that make you watch ads and notice that that's what's actually being sold in every ad.
Wait, so what is? Say it again.
Spirituality, meaning, purpose, an integrated, holistic, healthy life that has, that makes you feel like you've got a place in this world and that gives you some kind of footing and certainty and you feel significant and safe. And it's every one of them sells that. Which is why, okay, so the people who are studying the meaning crisis are saying, here's the signifiers that we have a problem, that we are in that desert or on Times Square lost, because there's a massive rise of anxiety. And anxiety is essentially the result of not knowing how to proceed into the future. Too many options. Everything could go wrong and no certainty. Which of these products? Well, there's 4,000 of them on the shelf. Which one's going to actually be the best? And you can get locked in anxiety over that. Which of these is going to give my life purpose, integrity, wholeness, meaning, safety? Holy crud, I have no idea. And there's no way to even begin to choose. So you feel anxiety.
You're touching on something else that is also a pitfall of the spiritual pursuit. And that is that there's also, you mentioned advertisers. There's people that are out to profit off of your pursuit.
Yes.
They see, and that's kind of terrifying.
Yes.
That's, you have that old metaphor of like the snake oil salesman but you also have the really scary side of the cult leader who's gonna lead you into doing something that you maybe don't want to do.
Right.
It's kind of scary. The world of searching spiritual meaning is fraught.
Yes. Yep. And it's only gotten worse in the last 20 years because of the access to options, right? Aggression. Well, what is your response to all of this uncertainty, unsafety, cynicism, which is what you're talking about? Everybody's out to get me, is the kind of conclusion. Well, aggression, you got to fight. That explains some of what's going on in the manosphere, right? There's a lot of aggression as a way of protection, as a way of establishing
not being
meaning.
a victim.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be victimized. I'm not going to be anybody's whatever.
Yeah. And I'm going to answer life's call and I'm going to be the one that decides. I mean, so it's a sort of an understandable, if scary response. Which choice? I can't decide which one's the best one because there's no way to know. Well, really, there is no way to know, and none of them are okay. Depression and suicide. It's sort of, whether it's literal suicide or other kinds of suicide, which is what addiction is. Addiction is a kind of suicide, right? It's a kind of checking out. And it was bizarre to me in researching this topic. When the people got to the level of addiction, here's some of the things they named: shopping, exercise. Like, the ones we're familiar with, obviously, drugs, alcohol, the internet, social
Mm.
media. But it struck me as huge that some of the things that we turn to out of self-destruction are pitched to us as the means by which we will find meaning. Exercise is a god in our era. It is a spirituality in its own right, but it is a kind of self-destruction.
That's depressing, Brandon.
We've painted the
That's
picture very
terrifying,
negatively. Yes, it is.
terrifying and depressing. I sure
Right.
hope that you have a good news for us as we turn the corner here. Please tell me there's a corner being turned.
I believe there is. I think the next question is sort of, well, then what is a Christian spirituality? And let's just pause and note that that question is going to be really complicated to answer, given that in the context of a spiritually seeking world, Christianity is going to have been influenced by that. There are going to be things that are called Christian spirituality that are very much just another way of searching for this kind of comfort and wholeness, but have really nothing to do with Christ.
Sure.
So we got to be careful there too.
And I think the word of caution is to say, it's whenever you call it Christianity, it's easy to put it in with all the other isms and entities that are out there, right?
Yeah.
And it just to be another option on the buffet for you to choose, and maybe even just sample and put it on the plate with all the other things that sound good to you. I think the core of what we're saying is the core of Christianity is Christ, not the religion, but the person.
Yeah.
Christ himself.
I heard it said this way. It's really, really genius. It's God is a human being. That sentence, understood in light of the crucified and risen Jesus, is the center point of all Christianity. And this guy named Oswald Bayer, as he writes this, he's what he's saying is he has this really fancy way of saying Christian, I'm going to use the word spirituality. Christian spirituality, he says, has to understand itself as being at the crossroads between mythology and science, essentially, or history. And his point is this: the Enlightenment demythologized all stories. Every story about every god, every story at all was really a commentary on human psychology or a means to control people. So all stories everywhere stop being stories in the Enlightenment and its resultant modernity. They become scientific tools to analyze human psychology or to control the population or to play a language game so that your political party can get into power. Mythology prior to that, let's go all the way back to the Greeks prior to, we're talking Plato and Aristotle. Mythology was understood to be, in some senses, fake or human-made stories, but what it was about the truly transcendent, truly divine stuff. So it was a way of trying to make the true transcendent divinity stuff understandable in human terms. But the stories were never taken literally. Like the Greeks didn't think, or at least Aristotle and Plato make a big point of this, they don't think that the gods, like Zeus, actually became a swan at some point. That's just a way of talking about a transcendent truth. Okay, so what Bayer means that Christianity or Christian spirituality is between mythology and science is that we tell stories about God. There are stories about God in the gospel that are making the divine things sensible to humans on our level. They are coming down, they're condescending to us. But we also believe those stories are true, historically, scientifically accurate. Jesus, we don't tell a story about a God who became a human in order to communicate some spiritual truth that's not really, some esoteric truth. We tell a story about a God who actually became human and thereby tells us truths. And those truths are, quote unquote, esoteric and perhaps beyond just what we can learn by reason alone, but they are communicated in historical, spatial, time, real, concrete, physical. God, Jesus was a human being. God was a human, is a human. And so our spirituality is unique. Our theology is unique. There is a transcendent truth. There is a realm of divine. There is eternal meaning. It has made itself touchable. It has
Mm.
become tangible and
Yeah.
audible and personal, and therefore we can actually contact it. We don't have to transcend ourselves in order to contact it. It descended itself in order to make itself himself.
Knowable.
Yes, touchable, experienceable.
Experienceable.
Exactly.
Okay, so we wondered whether this is going to matter. You already mentioned Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I had a very kind and generous friend who I love had tickets to go see him on his current book tour whenever he came through town. And his current book that he's, talking about and he's published is We Who Wrestle with God, right? You can read the book. It's interesting. You can also listen to him. It's all over the internet.
Yeah.
You can find out what he's saying. But even in the title, he's giving this image of Jacob wrestling with God in the night before he crosses the river to go face his brother, right? There's so much meaning in the biblical text, which I love the fact that he's drawing people's attention to.
Yeah.
However, one of the things that's interesting, and I really wish I would have got the opportunity to ask him, there was an opportunity to send questions in for him to talk about at the end of his lecture. And I missed the chance to type in a question, and it never came back up again. I thought I was going to get another chance. But the thing that I would love to ask Jordan Peterson or anybody who kind of resonates with that concept of we are wrestling with God, that image is a wrestling with God in the dark. God comes to Jacob in darkness, and the mystery of his opponent is, who am I against? What does it change that God reveals himself? What changes in that equation of I'm wrestling with God for meaning in life, to find my identity, to find my destiny? What does it change if all of a sudden he turns the lights on and says, here's who I am. I'm put in who you want. Obviously, I think it's Jesus, right? But what does it change in that equation? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm just so excited. I'm so excited that you said that, just because that is precisely the image that Oswald Bayer, the guy I've been quoting, uses. Exactly what you just said. He says Christian theology, Christian spirituality, let's use that term for now, is not wrestling with God in the dark, because, well, it starts there. He's using the exact same imagery you're using. The problem is that sinful humans, we are separated from God, right? We experience God in our sinfulness. And sinfulness here is, this is all going to hopefully kind of tie together. Sinfulness here is this desperate attempt to be our own meaning maker, to be our own definer, to be the one that says, I can't trust anything, and so I have to be the one that decides what's meaningful and purposeful. So to put a brief word to it, this is what Bayers uses, it's the desperate attempt to self-justify. All right? That's what that is. That's sin with a capital S, being in the state of having to self-justify. When God comes to us as sinners at first, it's in the dark because we can only experience him as this force that condemns. He is the ultimate other that means we are not justified because he's the meaning maker. I'm not. So I have to wrestle with him in the dark until he turns the lights on and reveals himself as the crucified and risen person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And then he reveals himself as the one who doesn't challenge our self-justification, but ignores it and justifies us out of love and care. And then we're not wrestling with God in the dark. We're not even wrestling. Now we're being loved by a very specific, concrete human being who is telling us the absolute truth of, I love you, I die for you, I justify you. You don't need to self-justify. And he uses exactly the image that you're using. And so, okay, maybe to kind of bring myself back into some, I get so animated about this. Okay, I hope this will make sense. Coming from that place of Christian spirituality begins with the physical, real, historical person of Jesus Christ who actually walked on the face of the planet and said stuff and did stuff. That person is God, is the divine, and that we don't have to transcend ourselves in order to meet it and know it. then it makes a lot of sense that the word spiritual in the Bible, in Paul's usage, means something very different than what we've been talking about. He contrasts the spirit-led person, the spiritual person, to the sin-led person. Now, he uses the language of spirit and flesh, but he doesn't mean body or material. What he means is sinful desires. Spirituality in biblical terminology is being spirit-led. In other words, living a life that is faith, looking to Jesus to be my justifier, and then living out of that reality. I am justified by the man Jesus Christ. I am loved by the divine. I am secured by the divine. God is for me. The Spirit is reminding me of that, comforting me of that constantly. That's its job. That's the Holy Spirit's job, to remind me of who Jesus is and what he said, and to comfort me with what he did, and so I can go love my neighbor. Because I got nothing to lose. This isn't what I do now in order to touch the divine. I don't have to go increase in virtue and the fruits of the Spirit in order to get to the divine, because God has already come and loved me and forgiven me and saved me and united me with him. And so now I just live out of it freely. And that's where, okay, this is sort of, maybe we put a pin in this and we have another episode and we go forward. Christian spirituality types kind of start to get different, because there are some forms of Christian spirituality that sort of lose sight of that and become attempts to climb the ladder back up to God, rather than recognize that God has already descended Jacob's ladder and come to us.
Well, and I think that's the hard thing to accept, right? And I think that's actually one of the barriers to accepting the gospel, is just the idea of I don't have to do anything. That doesn't make sense. Like, it's given to me. Why? It's hard to grasp.
Yeah. Well, and let's make it explicit. If the modern meaning of spirituality is a search for a holistic life, a sense of purpose and meaning, if it's the search for an experience of the divine and the numinous, Christ's answer to that is, that has been given to you by me and my work on the cross and resurrection. That reality is, in the words of Paul, right? Or maybe, no, it's Peter. 1st and 2nd Peter both talk about this, that our inheritance is kept for us by Christ in heaven. So there's a way in which Christ says, what you are longing for, that more that you're longing for, is going to be given to you, just not fully yet. And so where the world grasps for, if I'm thin enough and have the right exercise routine, if I'm in the right whatever, you name it, if I have the right toothpaste, I'll have the sense of shalom, of home. The Christian Christ answer is, no, that's not guaranteed to you yet. It's guaranteed to you in the future with me in the eschaton. Now you live by faith. And I give you your core need. And one of those is hope. One of those is the guarantee of that shalom that will come and be given to you. The other one is love. I guarantee that you are given my love in this world, he says. In the meantime, now I'm going to just promote my book that Leave and I wrote, which is literally, and our email, which is literally called In the Meantime. Christian spirituality is learning to live by faith in spite of the fact that I don't have everything I long for. That meaning, that sense of comfort, that sense of homeful, that like a lot of the Christian life is learning, how do I live not having that need completely met? How am I spirit-led, especially when the Spirit doesn't lead me to a sense of comfort and security and meaningfulness? And
I mean, that's our next episode. That's got to be it, because that's the next question. Is, it's like, okay, let's say I'm buying what you're selling here, Brandon, is that Christian spirituality is the path that's going to get me to the deepest desire of my soul, right? Well, what do we do then? And I think this is where a lot of people jump ship, or they quit before the investment matures, so to speak, is because, I mean, a lot of our listeners have been in church for a while. And
Yeah.
the sad thing is a lot of people leave Christianity, leave the church because it's not adding up. It's not working out. I'm sorry, that's just where my mind went of what you were
100%.
saying.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's why I said it. That's why there was that caution that not everything that calls itself Christian spirituality is, right? Because if the promise that is given to you, whether explicitly or implicitly, is you will find the meaning, you will find the holistic way of life, you will find that sense of purpose, you will get the numinous experience that gives you the certainty of whatever, just come to this church, just believe this doctrine, then somebody's selling you something, whether they mean to or not. That doesn't mean that there isn't oases in this life. That doesn't mean that there isn't an experience of God, that there isn't comfort. It's just not ultimate comfort in this life. It's just not the final answer in this life. And more importantly, the Christian spirituality says you will receive it, not gain it, not achieve it. And that's where the hard part is, because that requires us to wait on the Lord, which, come on, the Psalms.
that should be the next posted t-shirt, which,
The
Psalms.
Psalms. But now you can start to see spirituality in the Bible has so much to do with waiting on the Lord. Not denying that this desire is good, but waiting for God to fulfill it. And the struggle then becomes, well, why hasn't he? And why won't he? And what can I, there's struggle there, but our spirituality is not, come here, you will receive the answer to all your life's problems. It's come here, you'll receive hope. You'll receive clarity about what your life's problems actually are. I mean, there's a lot of things you'll receive. I hope that makes some sense and isn't me just saying you can't have what you want. I mean, you can't if what you want is bad for you. You can, just maybe not right now.
I think you're doing a terrible job of wrapping up this episode, Brandon, because all you're doing is sparking more pathways that I want to go down and talk about. Because, yeah, what you're saying, I mean, it's true. And I've definitely experienced that for sure. And again, I feel like I needed to have this conversation today because it's speaking right to something that I woke up struggling with of how long, Lord?
Yes.
And I needed to hear that. So
Right.
thank you for bringing that around. But I
Well-
think there's a lot of richness there to continue to
Yeah.
talk about and meditate on.
Yeah, well, we'll do that. How long, O Lord, is the cry of all the faithful, both because it's a lament and because it's a cry of faith, because it's
Yep.
implicit in how long is it's coming, just
Yep.
when, and that is very much the Christian spirituality. And I will say in closing on that is so much like, okay, if you're not signed up for our weekly email, sign up for our weekly email. It's free. The name of the email is In the Meantime, precisely because that's what we're constantly trying to ask and help.
Mhm.
How to live in this meantime between the final answer and Christ's first coming. And what do we do with this longing for more? Thank you, listeners, for joining us on the back porch. What a wild ride this one was, it feels like to me. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would, we are seriously begging for you to help us spread the word about this podcast. If you have found it useful, please go give it a rating on Apple Podcasts. Please send it to your friends. Help us get the word out that we exist. I think, unashamedly, I'm pretty convinced we're not the only ones, but I think we have good stuff to say to people who are longing for more and who are despairing. And I really want to help them. So would you help us reach them? Thank you. And we'll see you next time on the back porch. In the meantime, may the grace of Christ go with you wherever the road takes you.
Amen.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Signpost Inn Ministries. nonprofit Christian ministry dedicated to strengthening people's relationship with Jesus and walking with them compassionately on their life's journey. We offer spiritual direction, retreats, and lots of other resources like this podcast. Please visit us at signpostin.org to learn more. We especially want to thank our generous donors who support our work and keep this podcast going. If you've benefited from something you've heard, please consider supporting us by making a tax-deductible gift at signpostin.org/donate. We also want to thank Rex Daugherty for creating the original theme music for this podcast. You can check out more of his work at his website, and you can find all the links in our show notes.